My name is Imogen, and I'm 42 years old. For most of my life, the people who were supposed to believe in me the most, my own family, had a special word for me. It wasn't creative or intuitive. It was unfocused. They saw my passion as a flaw, my unique perspective as a distraction. They were a family of vintners, practical and proud, and I was the poet they didn't know what to do with. So I left. I built a life and a career and an empire on the very things they mocked. And then, years later, when their legacy, their vineyard, was crumbling into bankruptcy, they unknowingly came to me for salvation. They were so thrilled to be accepted by the country's most exclusive distribution network, never once suspecting that their long-lost, unfocused daughter was its anonymous founder. In 1 week, they have a strategy meeting with their new boss. They have a meeting with me. Before I dive into exactly how my family's dismissal became the catalyst for my greatest success, I want to welcome you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should have been your biggest champions, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes you have to write your own happy ending. The email wasn't even addressed to me directly. It was a mass message, sent out from my father's account to a long list of distant cousins, old family friends, and me, lumped in with the rest under a blind carbon copy. The subject line was typically grandiose: a new dawn for Oakwood Crest. I almost deleted it without reading. For 15 years, my direct communication with my father, Richard, could be counted on one hand. It was usually my mother, Eleanor, who would call on holidays, her voice strained with a forced cheerfulness that barely concealed the chasm between us. My older brother, Leo, might send a perfunctory text on my birthday, but an email from my father was a rare and usually unwelcome event. Curiosity, a weakness I've never quite managed to conquer, got the better of me. I opened it. His words were a tapestry of pride and relief, woven with the threads of his signature pomposity. He wrote of hardship and the challenging market, painting a picture of a noble struggle against overwhelming odds. He spoke of Oakwood Crest, our family's vineyard for 3 generations, as if it were a besieged kingdom. And then came the triumphant crescendo. They had been accepted into a new, highly selective distribution network, a firm called Véras. He described it as the lifeline they had been praying for, a partnership that would not only save the vineyard but elevate it to new heights of prestige. He wrote, "Véras is a visionary company. They understand that quality and legacy are paramount. They see the value in what we have built." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, sharp and sudden in the quiet of my office. My office, the one on the 30th floor, with a panoramic view of the city's skyline, the headquarters of Véras. My company. I scrolled down the email, a knot tightening in my stomach. He had attached the official acceptance letter, the one I had personally reviewed and approved only a week ago. Seeing our letterhead, our logo, the elegant, stylized V I had sketched on a napkin years ago, in an email from him felt like a violation. It was a collision of 2 worlds I had fought so hard to keep separate, my past and my present, slamming into each other with the force of a tectonic shift. He ended the email with an announcement about the upcoming meeting. Next Tuesday, we travel to the city to meet with the founder of Véras to map out our future. It is the beginning of a new chapter. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in protest. A new chapter. He had no idea. He was about to come face to face with the daughter he had written off, not as a prodigal child returning home, but as the sole arbiter of his fate. The unfocused girl was about to become the sharpest point in his life. To understand the sheer, earth-shattering irony of that moment, you have to understand Oakwood Crest. It wasn't just a business. It was our family's religion. It was over 500 acres of rolling hills, of gnarled old-growth vines that my grandfather, Arthur, had tended with a reverence usually reserved for ancient relics. The air there smelled of damp earth, fermenting grapes, and sun-baked oak. The main house, a sprawling stone structure covered in ivy, was less a home and more a monument to the Loran family name. And at its altar, my father, Richard Loran, presided as high priest. He was a man of science and tradition, a man who believed in quantifiable data. He could talk for hours about Brix levels, malolactic fermentation, and soil pH. He saw wine as a chemical equation to be solved, a product to be perfected through rigorous control. My brother Leo was his perfect acolyte. 2 years my senior, Leo was the heir apparent from birth. He was practical, sharp, and had an innate understanding of the business side of the vineyard. He saw wine in terms of profit margins, market shares, and distribution logistics. He and my father spoke a language of numbers and projections that was as foreign to me as ancient Greek. They were a closed circuit of mutual admiration, leaving my mother and me on the periphery. Eleanor, my mother, was the consummate vintner's wife. Her domain was the house, the gardens, the hosting of elegant parties where she would glide through rooms with a flawless smile, ensuring every guest's glass was full. Her role was to be a supportive, decorative presence, to smooth over my father's rough edges and maintain the pristine image of the Lauron family. She saw my divergence not as a personality trait, but as a social inconvenience. And then there was me. I didn't see wine as a science experiment or a balance sheet. When I tasted it, I didn't think of tannins and acidity first. I tasted stories. I tasted the sun of a dry summer, the struggle of the roots in rocky soil, the quiet patience of the cellar. I had my own language for it, one that my family found baffling and, ultimately, irritating. I remember one evening, I must have been about 10 years old. My father had opened a bottle of his prized Cabernet Sauvignon at dinner. He was holding court, explaining the precise timing of the harvest and the specific French oak barrels he'd used. He poured a small amount into my glass, a rare privilege. "All right, Imogen," he said, a challenging glint in his eye. "Tell me what you taste." I closed my eyes and took a sip. The flavors bloomed on my tongue, rich and complex. I didn't have the technical vocabulary, so I used the words I had. "It tastes like a velvet blanket on a cold night," I said softly. "And there's something like the smell of an old book and a little bit of my blackberry jam from last summer." I opened my eyes, proud of my description. Leo snorted into his napkin. My father's face was a mask of exasperation. "A velvet blanket? Imogen, for heaven's sake. That's meaningless. It's not poetry. It's a beverage. You're tasting blackcurrant, cedar, and a hint of graphite. Those are the notes. The tannins are firm but well integrated. The acidity provides structure. Focus on the facts." He turned to my brother. "Leo, your turn." Leo, ever the model student, swirled his glass expertly. "Firm tannins, yes. I get the blackcurrant, but also a touch of tobacco leaf on the finish. The oak is present but not overpowering. Excellent structure, Dad." My father beamed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Exactly. See, Imogen? That's how you analyze a wine. That's focus." My mother just gave me a tight little smile from across the table, a silent plea to just be quiet and not cause trouble. I felt my face flush with shame. My way of seeing, my personal connection to our life's work, was not just wrong. It was meaningless. It was the first of 1,000 paper cuts to my soul. The dismissal became a pattern, a constant, low-level hum of disapproval that underscored my entire adolescence. When I was 16, I spent the summer working the harvest. It was grueling work, but I loved it. I loved being out in the vineyard at dawn, the cool air on my skin, the earthy scent of the vines. I felt a connection to the land that I couldn't find in the sterile environment of the tasting room or the bottling plant. I was assigned to a section on the western slope, a block of Pinot Noir vines that had always been considered a bit temperamental. As the weeks went on, I started to notice something. The grapes from that block just felt different. They were smaller, the skins were tougher, and when I'd sneak a taste, the flavor was thin, almost watery. It lacked the vibrancy of the other grapes. It tasted to me sad. I tried to bring it up with my father one evening. We were in his study, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of leather and old paper. He was hunched over a spreadsheet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Dad," I began hesitantly, "I'm worried about Block 7. He didn't look up. "Block 7 is fine. The soil tests came back within acceptable parameters." "I know, but the grapes." I struggled to find the right words, the words he would understand. They taste weak. The leaves look a little pale to me. I think the soil is tired. It feels different when I walk on it. He finally looked up, peering at me over his reading glasses with an expression of profound weariness. Imogen, vines do not have feelings. The soil does not feel tired. This is precisely what I mean when I say you're unfocused. You get lost in these romantic notions instead of looking at the facts. The data says the block is fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. He turned back to his spreadsheet, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. 2 months later, an aggressive form of blight swept through Block 7, devastating nearly the entire section. An expert they brought in later confirmed my uneducated, romantic diagnosis. A subtle, deep soil nutrient deficiency had weakened the vines, making them susceptible. It was a problem that could have been easily rectified if caught early. My observation, born of intuition and intimate connection, had been correct. But it didn't matter. My father never acknowledged it. The loss was framed as an unavoidable agricultural tragedy. That same year, Leo was lauded for implementing a new bottling system that saved the vineyard a few $1,000s. His tangible, quantifiable success was celebrated at a family dinner. My ignored, and ultimately costly, insight was forgotten, buried like the dead vines. My only refuge in that house, my only advocate, was my grandfather, Arthur Loran. He was the one who had planted the first vines at Oakwood Crest, and he was the one who saw the magic in it, not just the mechanics. He was retired by the time I was a child, a gentle silver-haired man with hands as gnarled as the old vines he loved. While my father saw my unfocused nature as a liability, my grandfather saw it as a gift. He would take me on long walks through the vineyard, far away from the disapproving eyes of my father. He taught me the names of the wildflowers that grew between the rows and the calls of the birds that nested in the oak trees. He was the one who first told me that wine was a story. "Your father and brother, they are good men," he would say, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "They know how to build the house. But you, little bird, you know how to make it a home." They read the instruction manual. You read the poetry between the lines. Never let them convince you that one is more important than the other. He had a small, private cellar beneath the old carriage house, filled with dusty bottles from forgotten vintages. It was our secret place. He would light a candle, and we would sit on old wooden crates while he carefully uncorked a treasure. He would pour a little for me, even when I was young, and ask, "Tell me the story, Imogen. What does this one say?" And I'd talk about grumpy kings and dancing ladies, about forgotten memories and secret promises. He never laughed. He would just nod slowly, a smile playing on his lips. "Yes," he'd say, "I can taste that too." He was the one who nurtured my palate, who taught me to trust my instincts, to value my unique language. When he passed away when I was 17, it was like the last light in the house went out. The silence he left behind was deafening, filled only by the constant low hum of my family's disapproval. The final decisive break came the summer I was home from my first year of college. I had enrolled in a liberal arts program, a compromise that had pleased no one. My father had pushed relentlessly for a business or chemistry degree. "Oakwood Crest needs an heir, not a philosopher," he bellowed during one of many heated arguments. "What are you going to do with a degree in communications? Talk to the grapes." My dream was to become a sommelier. I had a binder hidden under my bed filled with research on certification programs, on the great sommeliers of the world, on the art of pairing food and wine. When I finally got the courage to mention it, he had scoffed. "A sommelier? Imogen, that's a glorified waitress. You stand around in a restaurant telling rich people what to drink. It's a service job, a hobby. It is beneath a Loran." That summer, my parents were hosting a critical dinner for a major national distributor, a man named Mr. Henderson, who could single-handedly change the fortunes of Oakwood Crest. The pressure was immense. My mother was a bundle of nerves for weeks, planning every detail. For the main course, she was serving a roasted duck. I saw an opportunity, a chance to finally prove my worth in a way they could understand. I spent days in the main cellar, carefully considering the options. I bypassed the obvious, powerful Cabernets that my father would favor. Instead, I selected a case of our older vintage Pinot Noir, the same varietal from the block I had worried about years ago, but from a much better year, a much better block. It was a subtle, elegant wine, with notes of cherry and earth and spice that I knew would complement the rich, fatty duck perfectly. It told a story of resilience, of the beauty that could be coaxed from a difficult grape. It was a statement. I presented my choice to my mother, explaining my reasoning in careful, deliberate terms. To my surprise, she agreed. It sounds lovely, dear. A very thoughtful choice. For a few days, I walked on air. I felt seen. I felt valued. I helped decant the wine myself, lovingly pouring each bottle, my heart swelling with a fragile hope. The night of the dinner arrived. The house was gleaming, filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the murmur of conversation. I felt a nervous pride as the main course was about to be served. I watched as the staff began to bring out the glasses. But they weren't the wide, bold burgundy glasses for the Pinot Noir. They were the tall, imposing Bordeaux glasses. My blood ran cold. I hurried to the kitchen. Lined up on the counter were not my carefully chosen bottles of Pinot Noir, but bottles of my father's newest, boldest, most aggressive Cabernet Sauvignon. A wine completely wrong for the dish. I found my father by the serving station directing the staff. Dad, what happened? We were serving the Pinot Noir. He didn't even look at me. He waved a dismissive hand. I changed it. Henderson is a man's man. He wants a big, important wine, not some delicate, flimsy thing. We need to impress him with power, not subtlety. His voice was laced with that familiar condescension. But it doesn't pair with the duck. I whispered frantically, conscious of the guests in the next room. It will clash. It will overpower everything. He finally turned to me, his eyes cold. It's my name on these bottles, Imogen. My decision. Your imaginative ideas are noted, but we'll stick with the classic. He then walked back into the dining room. A moment later, I heard his voice boom across the table. My daughter has some creative notions about pairing, but I told her tonight we go with the best. Our flagship Cabernet. Laughter rippled through the room. I stood frozen in the doorway, my face burning with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. I looked over at Mr. Henderson. He wasn't laughing. He caught my eye for a brief second, and in his gaze, I saw not derision, but something far worse, pity. He knew I was right. He was a professional. He knew my father had made a foolish, egotistical mistake, and he knew that I knew. I didn't stay for dessert. I walked up the grand staircase, my legs feeling like lead. I went to my room, the room I had grown up in, and I started to pack. I moved with a strange, numb clarity. I folded sweaters, packed books, gathered the few sentimental things that mattered to me. My grandfather's old corkscrew. A photo of us in the vineyard. When my suitcase was full, I carried it downstairs. My parents were in the hall, seeing off the last of the guests. My mother saw the suitcase first, her smile faltering. Imogen? What is this? My father turned, his face hardening when he saw me. What is the meaning of this drama? He demanded. I'm leaving, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're being ridiculous. You're emotional because I didn't choose your wine? Grow up. This isn't about wine, I said, my voice cracking slightly. This is about the fact that you will never, ever see me. You will never respect me. I can't live like this anymore. My mother wrung her hands. Don't be dramatic, dear. We're a family. No, I said, looking from her pleading face to my father's stony one. We're not. Not really. My father let out a short, harsh laugh. Fine. Go. You're unfocused. You can't stick to anything. You'll be back in a month, broken begging. You'll see what the real world is like. I looked him in the eye. No, I won't. I turned and walked out the heavy oak door, leaving it open behind me. I didn't look back. The real world, I thought, couldn't possibly be any colder than the one I was leaving behind. The first 6 months were a brutal education in the accuracy of my father's prediction, at least about the broke part. I had a few $100s to my name and a suitcase full of clothes. I found a tiny, grim apartment in a city I didn't know, with peeling paint and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The freedom I had craved tasted mostly of cheap instant noodles and the metallic tang of fear. I got a job waiting tables at a chain restaurant, the kind of place with sticky menus and endless birthday songs. I got a second job washing dishes in a greasy diner. I was perpetually exhausted, my hands raw, my feet aching. The vibrant world of wine felt a million miles away. It was a life of gray survival. There were nights I would lie awake, the sounds of the city a constant roar, and I would be consumed by a tidal wave of self-doubt. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I was just a flighty, dramatic girl with no concept of reality. Maybe I had thrown away a life of privilege for nothing. The urge to call home, to surrender, was a physical ache. One night, feeling particularly desperate, I gave in. I huddled in the corner of my chilly apartment and dialed the number I knew by heart. My mother answered. "Imogen? Is everything all right?" Her voice was distant, cautious. I tried to sound cheerful. "Hi, Mom. Yes, everything's fine. I wanted to say hello." The lie felt thick in my mouth. I wanted to scream that I was not fine, that I was scared and lonely and I had made a terrible mistake. But the pride that was my family's curse was my inheritance too. "Well," she said after a stiff pause. "That's nice." I could hear the television in the background, the muffled sound of my father's favorite news program. He was there, but he wouldn't come to the phone. "How are things at home?" I asked, my voice small. "Oh, everything is fine," she replied a little too brightly. "The harvest is looking good. Leo is doing a wonderful job with the new accounting software. Your father is very disappointed in your behavior, Imogen. He feels you've been very selfish." The words were like a slap. Not "we miss you," not "are you safe," just a recitation of my father's disappointment. "You made your choice," she added, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "I hope you're happy with it." The line went quiet. I had nothing else to say. "Okay, Mom. I have to go." "All right, dear. Goodbye." Click. I hung up the phone and cried. I cried for the mother I wished I had, for the family I had lost, and for the terrifying, yawning emptiness of the future. That phone call was a turning point. It was the last time I would ever call them looking for comfort. The door I had walked out of was now locked from the other side. I was well and truly on my own. The despair became a crucible. It burned away the last of my childish hope for their approval and forged something new in its place, a cold, hard resolve. I quit the diner. I took my meager savings and bought a single well-made black suit from a consignment shop. I polished my shoes, tied my hair back, and started walking into every fine dining restaurant in the city, asking if they needed help. Not as a server, but as a busser, a bar back, anything to get my foot in the door of a place that respected wine. Most turned me away. But one, a sleek, Michelin-starred establishment called Aria, gave me a chance. The manager hired me to polish glasses and bus tables. It was humbling work, but it was a world away from sticky menus. Here, wine was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. The head sommelier at Aria was a woman named Isabelle Dubois. She was terrifying. A chic, formidable Parisian in her 50s, she moved through the dining room like a shark, her eyes missing nothing. She had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and utterly intolerant of mediocrity. For weeks, I stayed out of her way, polishing hundreds of glasses a night until they sparkled, meticulously arranging them on the shelves, my head down, my mouth shut. I listened. I listened to her describe wines to guests, to the way she trained the junior sommeliers, to the arguments she had with chefs over pairings. I absorbed everything. One night, during a lull in service, Isabel was tasting a new arrival with two of her junior staff. It was a German Riesling. "What do you get?" she asked them, her tone sharp. The first one stammered, green apple? Citrus. The second one nodded eagerly. "Yes, lots of acidity." Isabel sighed, a sound of pure frustration. "Amateurs. You are describing lemonade. Where is the nuance? Where is the soul?" Her eyes swept the room and landed on me, standing silently by the glass racks. "You," she snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The polisher. You've been loitering and listening for a month. What do you smell?" She thrust the glass toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands were trembling slightly as I took the glass. This was it. A test. I closed my eyes, just as my grandfather had taught me, and inhaled deeply. I didn't think about what I was supposed to smell. I just let the aroma speak to me. Petrol, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. Like the smell of a garage on a rainy day. And wet slate. And white peaches. The fuzzy kind. I opened my eyes. The two junior sommeliers were staring at me, dumbfounded. Isabel's expression was unreadable. She took the glass back, took another sniff, and then a small sip. She held the wine in her mouth for a long moment, her eyes closed. Then she looked at me, a flicker of something new in her gaze. It wasn't pity. It was interest. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, her voice softer now. "My grandfather," I said. "And what does your family do?" "They own a vineyard," I admitted. "Oakwood Crest." Isabel raised an eyebrow. "I know it. Solid, if uninspired wines. They have no idea what they have in you, do they?" "No," I said. "They don't." She studied me for another long moment. "The rest can be taught," she said, almost to herself. "Chemistry, geography, the names, the laws. That can be learned. But palate is a gift. It cannot be taught." She turned to me fully. "My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. And for God's sake, wear something other than that busboy uniform." Isabel became my new family, my mentor, my drill sergeant. She worked me harder than I had ever worked in my life. She gave me stacks of books on viticulture, on oenology, on the wine regions of the world. She made me blind taste hundreds of wines, forcing me to identify not just the grape and the region, but the vintage and sometimes even the producer. She was ruthless in her criticism, but for the first time, the criticism was constructive. It was designed to build me up, not tear me down. "Your intuition is your superpower, Imogen," she told me once. "But it's useless without the discipline to back it up. The heart must be guided by the head." I flourished under her tutelage. I passed my introductory sommelier exam, then the certified exam. I moved from polishing glasses to being a junior sommelier on the floor of Aria. I was saving money, slowly building a life. A few years into my new life, I won a regional sommelier competition. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to me. There was a short article about it in a trade magazine, with a slightly blurry photo of me holding a silver tasting cup. On an impulse, I clipped it out and mailed it to my parents, with a short, simple note. "Thought you might like to see this." I didn't know what I expected. A phone call? A note of congratulations? A week later, I received a short email. It was from Leo. The entire message read, "Congrats. Dad says not to get a big head about it." I stared at the words on the screen, the casual, thoughtless cruelty of them. There was no pride, no acknowledgement, just a warning to stay in my place. I didn't feel hurt this time. I felt a surge of cold, clarifying anger. It was fuel. I printed the email and pinned it to the bulletin board in my tiny apartment. Every morning I looked at it. It was a reminder of what I was working for. Not their approval. Never their approval. I was working for myself. My time at Aria taught me more than just wine. It taught me about the business of wine. I saw firsthand how the distribution system worked, and I saw how it was broken. The big distributors were behemoths, focused on volume and marketing budgets. They championed the huge corporate wineries, the ones with recognizable labels and massive production. But the small, artisanal producers, the ones with incredible stories and breathtaking wines, were consistently overlooked. They couldn't afford the marketing, they didn't have the connections, and they were often forced to sell their beautiful, handcrafted products for a pittance to brokers who would blend them away into anonymity. These were the vineyards run by people like my grandfather, people who listened to the land. And the system was failing them. An idea began to form in my mind, a persistent, growing whisper. What if there was a different way? What if there was a distribution network that operated like a curated gallery instead of a big box store? A firm that was small, selective, and focused entirely on quality and story? A company that would champion the underdogs, give them a platform, and connect them with restaurants and collectors who would appreciate their art? The idea took root and grew into an obsession. I started writing a business plan at night, after my long shifts at the restaurant. I called it Véras, a name derived from veritas, the Latin word for truth. Truth in wine. Truth in business. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I had the wine expertise, but I needed someone with business and tech savvy. I found him in Matteo Rossi. Matteo was a regular at Aria, a tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his software company. He was smart, funny, and one of the few customers who seemed more interested in the story behind the wine than its price tag. We struck up a friendship. One night, over a bottle of obscure Corsican red, I pitched him my idea. I laid out my vision for Véras, my passion for the small producers, my frustration with the current system. He listened intently, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he grinned. "That's the best idea I've heard in 5 years," he said. "It's insane. The big guys will try to crush us. It'll be a nightmare. I'm in." And so Véras was born. We pooled our savings and took out a loan. We rented a small, unglamorous office space. The first year was a blur of long nights, cold pizza, and 100 rejections. We were 2 people with a laptop and a dream, trying to take on a billion-dollar industry. Our first client was a perfect embodiment of our mission, an elderly couple in Oregon who were making a stunning, ethereal Pinot Noir on a tiny 2-acre plot. They were on the verge of selling their land to a developer. They were our first success story. We got their wine into the best restaurants in the city. A rave review and a major publication followed. Within a year, they had a waiting list for their wine. Helping them succeed felt more satisfying than any award I could ever win. It was a validation of everything my grandfather had taught me, everything I believed in. As Véras grew, we made a crucial decision. We became incredibly selective, turning away far more wineries than we accepted. Our reputation became our greatest asset. Being a Véras wine became a mark of supreme quality and authenticity. And through it all, I remained behind the scenes. Matteo, with his easy charm and business background, became the public face of the company. I became the anonymous founder, the unseen curator, the ghost in the machine. It was a practical decision. My skills were in tasting and selection, not in schmoozing. But it was also a personal one. I didn't want my past to define my present. I didn't want to be Imogen Laurent, the runaway vintner's daughter who started a company. I wanted Véras to stand on its own, its reputation built on the quality of its portfolio, not on my personal soap opera. The anonymity was my shield. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, about 8 years after we started the company, Matteo walked into my office and dropped a thick application file on my desk. "Take a look at this one," he said, pulling up a chair. "It's a legacy vineyard from up north. Oakwood Crest." My blood turned to ice water. I stared at the familiar logo on the letterhead, the stylized oak tree my grandfather had designed. It felt like a ghost had walked into the room. Matteo, of course, had no idea. To him, it was just another file. "Their name is solid, but their financials are a train wreck," he continued, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside me. "Sales have been in a nosedive for the past 5 years. Reading between the lines of this application, they sound desperate." My hands trembled as I picked up the file. I opened it and read the words my father had written. The familiar, proud prose was still there, but it was brittle now, stretched thin over a foundation of panic. He wrote about tradition, about legacy, but there was a new, pleading tone I had never heard from him before. I flipped to the financial statements. Matteo was right. It was a disaster. I saw the numbers from the bottling system Leo had been so proud of, a short-term saving that had been followed by a long-term decline in perceived quality. I saw the plummeting sales figures for their flagship Cabernet, the one my father had chosen over my Pinot Noir on that fateful night. I skimmed the attached market analysis, which included excerpts from recent reviews and articles. Words jumped out at me. Inconsistent. Lacks character. Technically proficient, but soulless. Soulless. They had taken my grandfather's beautiful, living creation and, in their quest for control and predictability, had squeezed the very soul out of it. Matteo was watching me. "It's a gamble," he said. "They clearly need a complete overhaul." A total rebranding. But the raw materials are there. The land is good. What do you think? Should we take them on? I couldn't speak. I just stared at the application, at my father's signature at the bottom. The irony was so thick, so suffocating. I could barely breathe. The unfocused daughter, the one with the meaningless, imaginative ideas, was now their only hope. They had come to me, the source of truth in wine, to save them from the consequences of their own rigid, unseeing pride. I spent that entire night in my office, the file open on my desk. I paced the floor, a war raging inside me. Part of me wanted to shred the application, to write a one-line rejection and savor the cold, sweet taste of revenge. My father's words echoed in my head, "You'll be back in a month," broken, begging. Oh, how the tables had turned. But another part of me, the part that still loved the smell of that earth, the part that held my grandfather's memory sacred, felt a pang of something else. It wasn't pity. It was a sense of responsibility. Not to my family, but to the land itself. To the vines that my grandfather had planted. They deserved better than to die a slow, soulless death. By dawn, I had made my decision. I walked into Mateo's office, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. He looked up concerned. "You were here all night." "I've made a decision about Oakwood Crest," I said, my voice firm. "We'll accept them." Mateo raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" "It's a huge risk." "I'm sure," I said, "but on two conditions. First, I handle this account personally. Every decision, from the vineyard to the marketing, goes through me. And second, I run the first strategy meeting. Alone." Mateo looked at me, a question in his eyes. He knew me well enough to know there was a story here. But he also knew me well enough not to ask. He just nodded. "All right, Imogen. If that's what you want." I walked back to my office and drafted the acceptance letter, the very one my father had so proudly attached to his email. The trap was set. The prodigal daughter was not coming home. The boss was. The morning of the meeting, a strange, profound calm settled over me. The nervous energy, the anger, the residual hurt, it all seemed to recede, leaving behind a core of quiet, steely resolve. This wasn't the emotional, wounded girl who had fled her home in the middle of the night. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. The woman looking back was a stranger to that girl. I wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, a silk blouse the color of ivory, and my hair was swept back in a severe, professional chignon. I was the founder and CEO of Véras. I was the architect of my own life. I had built this fortress, and today, my ghosts were coming to visit. Mateo poked his head in the door. He knew the whole story now. I had told him everything 2 days before, needing at least one person in my corner who understood the emotional minefield I was about to walk into. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath. The city spread out behind me like a kingdom. "I've been ready for 15 years, I said. He nodded, giving me a small, encouraging smile. "I'll be in my office. If you need anything, just buzz." "Thank you, Mateo. For everything." "They don't know what's about to hit them," he said, before quietly closing the door. I walked to the boardroom, the click of my heels on the polished concrete floor the only sound in the hushed hallway. The room was my design, a long, imposing table of reclaimed wood, surrounded by sleek leather chairs. One entire wall was glass, offering a stunning, intimidating view of the city below. I stood with my back to the door, looking out at that view, my hands clasped behind my back. I was composing myself, marshaling my thoughts, becoming the role I had created. I heard the door open. My assistant, Clara, spoke in her calm, professional voice. "Mr. Richard, Mr. Leo, and Mrs. Eleanor Laurent are here for the 9 o'clock meeting." I heard the shuffling of feet, the soft whisper of my mother's voice saying, "Oh my, what a view." Richard cleared his throat, his voice attempting a familiar, booming authority that sounded thin and hollow in the cavernous room. An impressive setup. Very impressive. We're very much looking forward to meeting the founder. A visionary, from what I hear. I could feel their eyes on my back, their curiosity, their nervousness. This was it. I took one last slow breath and turned around. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. The expressions on their faces shifted in a sickening, cinematic sequence. Confusion first, a flicker of non-recognition. Then a dawning, horrified comprehension. My mother, Eleanor, made a small, strangled sound, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Leo, my ever-practical brother, simply froze. His jaw went slack, and all color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a marble statue. But it was my father's reaction that I will remember for the rest of my life. His face, already ruddy with a mix of excitement and stress, cycled through a Rolodex of emotions. Shock. Utter, profound shock. Then a dark, dangerous flush of purple-red rage began to creep up his neck, mottling his skin. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Imogen, he finally sputtered, the name a rusty, incredulous croak. What? What is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? Are you the new secretary? The old insult, the one he had hurled at me for years, was his first instinct. It was almost pitiable. I gave him a small, cold smile. I did not move from my position at the head of the table. No, father. I'm not the secretary. I let the words hang in the air, thick and heavy. My name is Imogen Laurent, and I am the founder and CEO of Véras. Welcome to my company. I gestured to the chairs across from me. Please have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss about the future of Oakwood Crest. My voice was even, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. It was the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of their boss. Or, I added, letting the word land with deliberate weight, if it has one. They stumbled into their chairs, moving like puppets with their strings cut. They looked small and lost in the vast, intimidating space. I remained standing, a deliberate assertion of power. I picked up a small remote from the table and clicked it. The glass wall behind me, the one with the stunning view, instantly transformed into a massive presentation screen. The first slide appeared, the Oakwood Crest logo, looking tired and dated. Next to it, a line graph showing a steep, terrifying, 5-year decline in sales. My father flinched as if he'd been struck. I began to speak, my voice cool and clinical, the voice I used with any other potential client. Let's begin. Oakwood Crest is a legacy brand with significant name recognition. Unfortunately, that recognition is currently tied to a market perception of declining quality and a lack of clear identity. I clicked to the next slide. It was filled with quotes from wine critics, bloggers, and industry reviews. I read them aloud, my voice flat. Technically proficient, but soulless. From Wine Spectator. A once great vineyard that seems to have lost its way. From a leading industry blogger. Inconsistent vintage over vintage, lacking the character that once defined it. From the Sommelier's Journal. I paused, letting the words sink in. The market has a story about you, I said, looking directly at my father. And the story is that you have lost your narrative. Leo, ever the numbers man, finally found his voice. It was shaky, but defensive. Our production costs are lower than they've ever been. Our yield per acre is up 12%. My systems are efficient. I clicked to the next slide without looking at him. It showed a complex chart correlating his efficiencies with the decline in the wine's average selling price and market score. Your efficiencies have come at a cost, Leo, I said calmly. You've been treating winemaking like car manufacturing. You've streamlined the soul right out of the bottle. The market can taste it. They are paying less because you are giving them less. Leo slumped back in his chair, defeated. My mother, who had been silent and pale, finally spoke. Her voice was trembling, pleading. Imogen, dear, after all these years, can we not just talk? As a family. I turned my gaze on her, and for the first time, a sliver of the ice in my veins melted, replaced by a flash of white-hot anger. We are not here as a family, Eleanor, I said, the use of her first name a calculated strike. You are here as the representatives of a potential client whose business is on the verge of collapse. I am here as the person who is deciding whether or not your legacy is worth the investment to save it. Family is not on the agenda today. Business is. My mother recoiled, tears welling in her eyes. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, but I crushed it. This was not the time for sentiment. This was the time for truth. That was when my father finally erupted. The shock had worn off, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. "How dare you?" he roared, his face contorted. "How dare you sit there in your ivory tower and lecture us? After everything we gave you. A home, a name, an inheritance you threw away. You abandoned your family, you abandoned your duty. All because you were too sensitive, too unfocused." He spat the word out like a curse. "You ran away from your responsibilities, and now you want to lord your success over us? You were always lost in your own little world, Imogen, and you still are." I let him finish. I let his anger wash over me, and I felt nothing. His words had lost their power to wound me. They were just the desperate, dying roar of a fallen king. I waited until he was breathing heavily, his tirade spent. Then I spoke, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully polished stone. "Unfocused," I began, the word tasting strange and new on my tongue. "Let's talk about that word. You called my passion unfocused. You called my intuition imaginative ideas. You called my desire to understand the heart of what we do a hobby. You're right. I was unfocused. I was focused on trying to earn the love of a father who was incapable of giving it. I was focused on trying to win the approval of a man who couldn't see value in anything he couldn't measure on a spreadsheet. I was focused on trying to be heard in a house where my voice was nothing but an inconvenience. I took a step closer to the table, leaning forward slightly on my hands. So I left, and I refocused. I focused on my education. I focused on my craft. I focused on building this. I swept my arm around to indicate the room, the view, the company, a business built on the very principles you scorned. Story, passion, intuition. The unfocused ideas you threw away like trash are the foundational pillars of the most successful and exclusive wine distribution network in this country. The network you begged to get into. The network that is, by your own admission, your last and only hope. My gaze locked with his. So yes, father. Let's talk about focus. Your focus on pride, on control, on data without soul, has driven my grandfather's legacy to the brink of extinction. My unfocused approach is the only thing on this earth that can save it. The real question isn't about my focus. It's about yours. Are you, for the first time in your life, willing to focus on what I have to say? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a battlefield after the final shot has been fired. My father stared at me, his rage extinguished, replaced by a gray, ashen shock. He looked old. He looked beaten. I walked back to my place at the head of the table and clicked the remote one last time. A final slide appeared. It was a single page, a list of terms. "Here is the offer from Véras," I said, my voice all business once more. "We will take over full operational, creative, and financial control of Oakwood Crest for a period of 5 years. You will retain ownership in name only. You, Richard, and you, Leo, will step down from all management positions. You will become salaried consultants. Figureheads. Your job will be to smile at events and stay out of my way. I will have the final say on everything, from which grapes are planted to the label design on the bottle. We will replant Block 7. We will rehire the winemaker you forced into early retirement. We will restore the soul to this vineyard." I looked at each of them in turn. "These are my terms. They are not negotiable. You can accept them, or Véras will officially pass on your application. And according to my analysis, without our backing, Oakwood Crest will be forced to declare bankruptcy within 6 months." I slid a printed contract across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of my father. "You have 24 hours to decide. This meeting is over." I turned, and without another word, I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them shattered in the silence. The moment the boardroom door clicked shut behind me, the facade of icy control began to crack. I walked on unsteady legs down the hall to Mateo's office, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the adrenaline and the weight of 15 years of unspoken words. I pushed his door open and closed it behind me, leaning against it for support. Mateo was on his feet instantly, his face etched with concern. Imogen. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, a single violent tremor running through my entire body. It wasn't a sob, but it was close. It was the release of a pressure that had been building inside me for more than a decade. He didn't rush me with questions. He just quietly guided me to a chair and placed a glass of water in my trembling hands. "You did it," he said softly after a long moment of silence. I took a sip of water, the cool liquid a small anchor in the storm raging inside me. "I did it," I whispered, the words feeling foreign. "I don't know what I feel, Mateo. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated. But I just feel empty." "It wasn't about revenge, was it?" he asked gently. I looked at him, my partner, my friend, the one person who had seen me not as a vintner's daughter or a business prodigy, but just as Imogen. "No," I admitted, the truth of it surprising me. It was never about revenge. It was about truth. It was about finally making them see. Not just see my success, but see me. The person I was all along. I spent the next hour in his office, not as a CEO, but as a person, slowly coming to terms with the seismic event that had just occurred. The war was over. I just had to figure out how to live in the peace. I can only imagine the car ride back to the vineyard for them. Years later, my mother described it to me as the longest, quietest, and most terrible drive of her life. She said the silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shock and shame. Leo drove, his hands clenched white on the steering wheel, his face a grim mask. My father stared out the window, his reflection a pale, ghostly image of the proud patriarch who had driven into the city that morning. According to my mother, it was Leo who broke the silence first, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "She's right, you know." My father didn't respond. "The numbers," Leo continued as if speaking to himself. "All the numbers she put up on that screen, they were all correct. I've been looking at them for months, trying to spin them, trying to find a way out. There isn't one. We're out of time, Dad. We're out of money. There is no other way." That was when the denial shattered and the rage returned. Only this time it was a desperate, impotent rage. "I will not be humiliated by my own daughter," he had apparently roared, his voice cracking. "I will not hand over my father's legacy to her. We'll sell. We'll find another investor." It was my mother who finally spoke, her voice small but clear, cutting through his fury. "Who, Richard? Who will invest in a failing business? And who are you to speak of your father's legacy? Arthur loved her. He saw her. You were the one who was blind. You never listened to her. Not once. You pushed her away, and now look at us. This is on you, Richard. All of it." It was, she told me, the first time in their 45 years of marriage that she had ever spoken to him that way. The rest of the drive was silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a world that had been irrevocably broken. The call came the next afternoon, just as the 24-hour deadline was approaching. I saw Leo's name flash on my phone screen, and my heart gave a nervous lurch. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice deliberately neutral. "Imogen Laurent." There was a pause on the other end, and then Leo's voice, stripped of its usual confidence. It was the voice of a man who had been humbled. "Imogen, it's Leo." "I know." "We've discussed your offer," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "We accept your terms." "I'll have my legal team send over the final contracts," I said, keeping my tone strictly professional. "We can have them signed by the end of the week." "Okay," he said. Then he hesitated. "Imogen, wait." I waited. I heard him take a shaky breath. I'm sorry." The apology was clumsy, inadequate, a tiny bandage on a gaping wound. "I never saw it," he continued, his voice thick with a dawning, painful regret. "I was just doing what Dad taught me. I was focused on the numbers. I never thought about the soul. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. It was the first crack in the wall of their pride. The contracts will be there tomorrow, Leo, I said softly and hung up. A week later, I drove up to Oakwood Crest. It was the first time I had set foot on the property in 15 years. As I drove up the long, familiar driveway lined with oak trees, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. The place was just as beautiful as I remembered, the hills bathed in the golden late afternoon light. But I wasn't the returning daughter. I was the new boss. I was there to perform a resurrection. The staff, many of whom had known me since I was a child, watched me with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe as I got out of the car. I walked past the main house, ignoring the figures I could see watching from the window, and went straight to the winery. I found the head winemaker, a man named Thomas, in the cellar. He was a kind, talented man whom my father had consistently bullied and undermined for years. He looked tired, worn down. He straightened up nervously when he saw me. "Miss Laurent," he said, his voice wary. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. "It's Imogen. And you're Thomas. I've heard you've had some ideas for a new reserve blend that my father wasn't interested in." His eyes widened in surprise. "Ah, yes. 4 years. Good," I said, my voice gentle. "Tell me about it. Tell me what the wine wants to be." The look of profound, dazed relief that washed over his face was my first real taste of victory. It was better than any revenge. I wasn't just saving a business. I was letting a story be told again. I was giving Oakwood Crest its soul back. 2 years passed. 2 years of incredibly hard work, of gutting old systems and rebuilding from the ground up. I didn't move back home, but I was at the vineyard 2 or 3 days a week, working alongside Thomas, walking the rows, tasting from the barrels. I wasn't just the boss. I was part of the process again, my hands in the soil. And the vineyard responded. It came back to life, as if it had been holding its breath for 15 years and could finally exhale. The proof came in a bottle. We had replanted Block 7, the sad, neglected plot of land, with carefully selected rootstock. We had nurtured it, listened to it. The grapes it produced were extraordinary. From them, we created a new flagship wine, a Pinot Noir. I named it L'Intemporel, the Timeless. It was a tribute to my grandfather. Last spring, it won a major international gold medal. Oakwood Crest was not only saved, it was more celebrated and successful than it had ever been, even in its supposed glory days. My relationships with my family, fractured for so long, began to slowly, cautiously redefine themselves. Leo and I forged a new kind of partnership. He was still the numbers man, but now he understood his role. He supported my vision, executing the logistics with a newfound respect and humility. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. We weren't close, not like other siblings, but we were a team. My mother, Eleanor, began a campaign of quiet reconciliation. She would invite me to lunch in town, never at the house. At first, our conversations were stilted, full of unspoken things. Then one day, over a salad, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I was a coward, Imogen," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought my job was to keep the peace. But all I did was stand by and watch your father hurt you. I chose his pride over my own daughter. There is no excuse for that, and I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited half my life to hear. Our relationship is still a fragile, tender thing, but it is healing. We are finding our way back to each other. My father is the most complicated piece of the puzzle. He and I orbit each other at a careful distance. He lives at the vineyard, a ghost in his own kingdom. He holds no title, no power. The proud, booming patriarch is gone, replaced by a quiet, solitary old man. He takes long walks through the vineyard, often ending up at my grandfather's grave, which sits on a hill overlooking the vines. One evening, I found him there, sitting on the stone bench as the sun went down. I almost turned to leave, but he looked up and saw me. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to purple. He never said he was sorry. The words would have choked him. But as I stood to leave, he spoke, his voice raspy. "Arthur," he said, looking at my grandfather's headstone. "He would have been so proud of you." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a full reconciliation. But it was an admission. It was a concession. It was, in its own way, a kind of peace. Last month, at a major industry event, I was on a panel of leading vintners and distributors. Someone in the audience asked me about Betrayal and the secret to its incredible success, to the revitalization of Oakwood Crest. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and I smiled. "There's no secret," I said. "You just have to be willing to listen. The story is already there, in the soil, in the grapes, in the history. You just have to be focused enough to hear it." I had finally reclaimed the word. My focus wasn't a flaw. It was my strength. My validation didn't come from my father's approval or a line in a magazine. It came from the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, from the taste of a beautiful wine, from the peace I had found not by running away from my past, but by reshaping it into my future. Looking back on it all, I realized the most profound lesson wasn't about business or wine. It was about worth. For so long, I had let my family's definition of me become my own. Their dismissal felt like a verdict on my very being. But your value isn't a reflection in someone else's eyes. It's a fire you have to tend within yourself. Sometimes, the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the greatest gift, the motivation to prove them wrong, not for their sake, but for your own. Being underestimated can be a superpower. It gives you the quiet space to build an empire they can't even imagine, to become a person they would never recognize. And the sweetest victory is not their applause, but your own quiet, unshakable peace. I would love to hear your story. Have you ever been underestimated or had your passion dismissed as a distraction? Share your experience in the comments below, because our stories have power. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like so that more people can find it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your strength and rewriting your own narrative. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Thank you for listening. Remember that family is not just about blood. It's about who sees you, who supports you, and who helps you grow. I wish you all the strength in the world to find and to be that kind of family.